saying up here tonight. I'm well aware, but I have never said or done anything in my life that I wasn't prepared to suffer the consequences for.
Assalamu alaikum, bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Brothers and sisters, today I want to talk to you about a contemporary Muslim hero in the eyesight of many people. As a Muslim, every Muslim want to talk about Allah, and we should. The word that is most repeated in the Quran is the word Allah. So as a Muslim, we want to know the Lord of the worlds, Allah, the creator of the heavens and earth. What does he say? So every Muslim want to know about Allah. Number two, every Muslim want to know about the messenger of Allah, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's the last prophet, the seal of the prophets, and we want to know about him, and we want to know about all the prophets. And then every Muslim want to know about the companions of the messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Bakr, Umar, Ali, Uthman, Aisha, Khadija, and all of them. But every once in a while, we ought to be concerned about contemporary Muslim figures. When you study the life of Malcolm X, a man who was born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska, 1925, who in 1952 became a member in an organization called the Nation of Islam and changed his name from Malcolm Little to Malcolm X. And then in 1965, the same man, Malcolm Little, Malcolm X, became Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz when he performed pilgrimage to Mecca.
I've always had the name on my passport, Malik al-Shabazz, I only used it in the Muslim world. Well, Hajj is a title that is given to any Muslim who makes the pilgrimage to Mecca during the official Hajj season.
Why should we study his life? Because there is almost an infinite amount of lessons to be learned from him. I believe what the Prophet said, peace and blessing be upon him. He made this dua, Allahumma inni a'udhuka min ilmin la yanfa'u. Oh Allah, I seek refuge with you from knowledge that doesn't benefit. When we study the life of Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, there's so many benefits that we can learn. You can't talk about Malcolm unless you talk about the history of African Americans. So what I want to do is talk about some of the history of the United States, especially with African Americans and their fight for justice, fight against racism. So it wasn't just Malcolm X, it was people like Martin Luther King Jr. and others who fought against this racism. So one, I want to talk about the history of the African Americans, history of America. And then I want to talk about some of the biography of Malcolm. Some of the things that happened in his life. For instance, when he was in the 8th grade, his teacher asked him what he wanted to become. And he was really going to almost the entire school were white European Americans. And his white teacher said, Malcolm, what would you like to do when you grow up? And Malcolm said, I'd like to be a lawyer. And his teacher told him that that's not realistic for an African American, and you ought to think about something like being a carpenter. So I want to talk about that, how that affected Malcolm X, because after the 8th grade, he dropped out of school. And then if you study his history, he went into a history of drugs and crime. Went to prison, and in prison for 6 years, he started studying the theology of the Nation of Islam. I want to talk about the theology of the Nation of Islam. And then finally, when Malcolm came out of prison in 1956, he was the most prominent member, I would say, of the Nation of Islam. He was the national spokesman for Mr. Elijah Muhammad.
Muhammad makes it imperative that a black man who becomes a Muslim works. Right. Get off the welfare. Right. Get out of that compensation line. Right. Be a man. Right. Earn what you need for your own family. Right.
All of this history, I think, is important for not only Americans to study, but people from other societies, other countries, other cultures to study, hence in the United Kingdom. I think there are a million lessons to be learned from Malcolm. Fast forward, in 1964, for many reasons, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz announced his Declaration of Independence from the Nation of Islam.
I did receive word from him that the 90-day suspension that I was under was not to be lifted that it would remain indefinite. And as I...
When did this take place?
This past week. And so I just reached the conclusion that I frankly didn't think that I would ever be an active member of the Nation of Islam anymore.
That year, he performed the pilgrimage to Mecca. He became Sunni Muslim. I want to tell you a little bit about the Nation of Islam. This organization has to be studied. I can tell you this, that I used to be a minister in the Nation of Islam. And there are a lot of lessons to learn. One thing you can say is that they really showed that they love black people. When you look at the climate of the African Americans, when you look at the racism, Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "He who gets behind in a race must forever remain behind or run faster than the man up front." And when you look at black people economically, politically, socially, in terms of the family, every criterion, health, black people were on the bottom. So the Nation of Islam Elijah Muhammad took interest in the people, the African Americans. Malcolm X, this man, this great warrior, one of the things that he had that Muslims can learn for is a tremendous amount of courage. He was charismatic, he was articulate, he was eloquent, and he was not afraid to talk against the injustices of the American government.
Are you prepared to go into the United Nations at this point and ask that charges be brought against the United States for its treatment of American Negroes?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, please. I think you're right in my chair. The audience will have to be quiet. Yes, as I pointed out when I was during my traveling, that nations African nations and Asian nations and Latin American nations look very hypocritical when they stand up in the United Nations condemning the racist practices of South Africa and that which is practiced by Portugal and Angola, and saying nothing in the UN about the racist practices that are manifest every day against Negroes in this society. Even in South Africa, those Africans aren't faced with bayonets and aren't faced with police dogs. I would be not a man. If I was in a position to bring it in front of the United Nations and didn't do so, I wouldn't be a man.
And one of the things that the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, said that the best jihad, the best struggle, is the struggle against an unjust ruler. And Malcolm was that. He wasn't afraid. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, used to make supplication, "Oh Allah, I seek refuge with you from cowardice." And definitely Malcolm X was not a coward. And he went out and he went everywhere and he taught the message of Islam as he understood it, and he taught the liberation of his people. One of the great lessons of Malcolm X, if you study his history, you read the autobiography of Malcolm X, you see that when he dropped out of school, he got involved in a life of crime. Every crime that you can imagine, from drugs, prostitution, robbery, and things like that. And then he went to jail, and after he was in jail, he studied the theology of, quote-unquote, the Nation of Islam. And the remarkable thing about Malcolm is that he changed his life around, or his life was changed around. Allah mentioned in the Quran, Allahu wali ladina aminu yukhrijuhum min adh-dhulumati ila an-nur. Allah is the protector of those who believe. He takes them from the darkness and he brings them into the light. If you study this organization called the Weight Watchers, these are the people who've had difficulty with their weight. And the best spokesmen for Weight Watchers are those who had difficulty with their weight, and then they come and they transform themselves and they inspire others. Malcolm was the same way. Malcolm became a great spokesman for Islam because of what he used to be.
Most of the Muslims who follow Mr. Muhammad absolutely believed that it was impossible, physically impossible, I should say divinely impossible, for a white person to go to Mecca. And my trip there shattered that image, or that misconcept.
If you study his teachings, he wasn't a traditional sheikh. He didn't come teaching Islamic fiqh or Islamic law. No, he didn't do that. But he taught a very, very practical message. Malcolm gave a message to the grassroots. He people understood his message. He can talk to the man and the woman in the street. So when you study from some of the lessons of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, you see one of transformation, coming from the darkness and moving into the light. Malcolm was a man that when he would find the truth, he would accept it. And that's the way he was all throughout his life. And when he found Islam and then found what we call true Islam, Orthodox Islam, this man began to teach it. And again, if you read his autobiography, you see Malcolm talking about Islam and the belief in the one God. Once he understood the true meaning of Islam, he taught it. Interesting to note that Malcolm made pilgrimage in 1964. The people that brought him in 1964 wanted him to make pilgrimage again in 1965. But in February 21st, 1965, Malcolm's life was cut short. In New York City, he was assassinated. So the same people that wanted to bring Malcolm to make Hajj a second time actually brought Malcolm's wife, Dr. Betty Shabazz, and she made pilgrimage in Mecca in 1965 while she was pregnant with twins. Brothers and sisters, may Allah bless you. Please study this man. 2 books I recommend. 1, the autobiography of Malcolm X, and 2, Ilyasa Shabazz, Malcolm's daughter, wrote a great book called Growing Up X, a fabulous book. May Allah bless you. Assalamu alaikum.